Over the English Channel in the winter of 1944, a B-17 drops from formation with 2 engines dead. The crew knows the drill: bail out, take your chances with the cold water below, but the pilot stays at the controls. He ignores protocol, he ignores physics, he ignores every voice on the intercom telling him it's over. 10 men are breathing hard in that aluminum tube, and he's convinced there's a way to bring them all back. The 8th Air Force calls it strategic bombing. The crews call it something else: suicide in daylight. Every mission over occupied Europe is a statistical proposition. How many planes leave, how many return? How many men never see England again? By late 1943, the numbers are grim. More than 30% of heavy bomber crews don't survive their 25 mission tours. Some groups lose half. Flak bursts shred wings at 20 zeros, 0 FD. German fighters swarm like hornets around formations that stretch for miles, and the bombers keep flying, wave after wave, day after day. The B-17 Flying Fortress is supposed to live up to its name. 1350 caliber machine guns, armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, 4 Wright Cyclone engines generating nearly 0 horsepower. It's designed to absorb punishment and keep flying, but punishment is relative. A direct flak hit doesn't care about engineering. A 20 cannon shell through the cockpit doesn't respect American ingenuity. The men who fly these machines are mostly in their early 20s. Farm boys from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, college students who left calculus classes to learn bombardier mathematics of a different kind. They wear heated suits against the negative 40 degrees cold at altitude. They breathe through oxygen masks. They watch friends' planes disintegrate in midair and then climb back into their own aircraft the next morning. The culture of the bomber groups is peculiar. Superstition mingles with engineering precision, lucky jackets, ritual routines before takeoff, nose art featuring pin-up girls and cartoon characters. But beneath the bravado is a sharp awareness of mortality. The empty bunks, the personal effects shipped home, the letters that start with regret to inform you. Briefings happen before dawn. Officers pull back curtains to reveal maps marked with red yarn stretching deep into Germany. Targets, flight paths, known flak concentrations, fighter bases. The intelligence officers speak in calm voices about high-priority objectives. The crews hear life expectancy calculations. Formation flying is religion. Tight boxes of aircraft provide overlapping fields of fire. A bomber alone is a dead bomber. German pilots know this. They probe for stragglers, for damaged aircraft falling behind, for any plane that loses position and becomes vulnerable. The doctrine is clear: stay in formation, follow the lead bomber. If you're hit and losing altitude, the formation continues without you. The mission is larger than any single crew. The target matters more than the 10 men in one airplane. This logic is sound. This logic is ruthless. This logic doesn't account for pilots who think differently. If you want more such stories, like and subscribe so these lives aren't forgotten. Robert Rosenthal grew up in Brooklyn during the Depression. His father ran a small business. His mother kept the family together through the lean years. Robert was sharp, quick with numbers, good with his hands, the kind of kid who took apart radios to understand how they worked and then put them back together better than before. He went to Brooklyn College, studied chemistry, thought about law school. Then Pearl Harbor happened and the calculus changed. By 1943, he's a first lieutenant learning to fly the heaviest bomber in the American arsenal. Flight school reveals something about Rosenthal that his instructors notice immediately. He doesn't just follow procedures. He absorbs them, internalizes them, then asks why. Why this altitude for this maneuver? Why this power setting for that condition? He wants to understand the machine at a level beyond rote memorization. His crew forms up in the States before deployment, 10 men who will live in close proximity to violent death. Co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, flight engineer, radio operator, ball turret gunner, 2 waist gunners, tail gunner, each man a specialist, each man dependent on the others. They arrive in England in the autumn of 1943, assigned to the 100th Bomb Group at Thorpe Abbotts. The 100th has a reputation, not a good one. They've taken staggering losses. Other groups call them the Bloody Hundredth. The name isn't affectionate. Rosenthal flies his first mission in September, a raid on Stuttgart. The flak is heavy, the fighters are aggressive, his plane takes hits but makes it home. He learns what the briefings can't teach. The sound of shrapnel tearing through aluminum, the smell of cordite and hydraulic fluid. The way fear sits in your chest like a weight, he flies again and again, Bremen Muster Schweinfurt. Each mission adds to his understanding of the bomber's capabilities and limitations. He pays attention to details other pilots dismiss, how the aircraft handles with different fuel loads, how it responds when engines fail, how far you can push the airframe before something fundamental breaks. Between missions, there's the waiting, the English weather, the mud, the cold Quonset huts, the nervous energy that has nowhere to go except into cards and letters and fitful sleep. Some men crack, some request transfers to other duties. Some simply stop functioning and get sent home. Rosenthal stays focused. His crew begins to trust him in the way bomber crews must. They see his preparation, his calmness under fire, the way he brings them back when other planes don't return. Trust in a bomber crew is not sentimental, it's practical, it's survival. By early 1944, Rosenthal has flown more than a dozen missions. He's seen formations torn apart. He's watched B-17 spiral down trailing fire. He's heard the radio calls from pilots who know they're not making it home. And he's developed a theory that runs counter to everything the Air Force teaches. He believes you can bring a crippled bomber home alone, without formation support, without altitude, without half your engines if necessary. He believes the math works if you understand the aircraft completely. If you're willing to fly it beyond the manual's margins, if you prioritize crew survival over doctrine, he doesn't advertise this theory. The group commander wouldn't approve. The operations officer would cite regulations, the other pilots would call it crazy, so he keeps it to himself. A private conviction built on observation and logic, a plan for a situation he hopes never to face. The mission briefing on February 25, 1944, reveals a target that makes experienced crews go quiet. The Messmet factory at Regensburg, deep in southern Germany, more than 600 miles from England, beyond the range of fighter escort for much of the journey. The strategic logic is sound. Regensburg produces Bf 109 fighters. Destroy the factory and you reduce the German fighter force. Simple. Except the Germans know how valuable the target is. They defend it accordingly. The weather is marginal. Low clouds over England, fog at altitude. The kind of conditions that make formation assembly difficult, but the mission is approved. Maximum effort. Every available bomber. Rosenthal and his crew walk to their B-17 in the Preed. On darkness. The aircraft is cold, frost on the wings. The ground crew has already performed the pre-flight checks, but Rosenthal does his own walkound, a ritual, a way to know the machine before trusting it with 10 lives. Engines start with coughs of blue smoke. 4 massive radials turning over, the sound is thunderous across the airfield, dozens of bombers coming alive, the smell of high-octane fuel and oil, the vibration through the airframe, the takeoff is routine. The formation assembly less so, visibility is poor. Bombers circle the field, climbing slowly through cloud layers, finding their group, finding their position in the box. It takes longer than planned. Fuel burns, engines strain, they cross the channel in formation. Altitude 24 zeros, 0 FT, temperature far below zero. The English coast falls away behind them. Ahead is occupied Europe. Ahead are the German fighter bases. Ahead is the flak belt that rings every strategic target. The first fighters appear over Holland, Focke-Wulf 190s. They make head-on passes at combined closing speeds over 500 mph. The B-17's guns hammer. Spent casings rain down inside the aircraft. The fighters peel away and come again. Rosenthal holds formation. The lead bomber sets the pace. The group stays tight. This is doctrine. This is survival. But bombers are already falling. He sees one to the left lose a wing. It tumbles, no shoots. He sees another streaming fire from the number 3 engine. It drops away. The formation closes the gap and continues over Germany. The flak begins, black bursts at bloom at altitude. Each burst is shrapnel expanding at lethal velocity. The pilots can't evade. Formation flying requires steady course and speed. They fly through the flak field because the target demands it. The bomb run is the worst part. Long minutes of straight and level flight while the bombardier makes final adjustments. The aircraft belongs to the Norden bomb site. Now the pilot maintains heading. The flak gunners below know this. They know the bombers can't maneuver. They adjust their fire accordingly. Bombs away. The B-17 lurches upward suddenly lighter by 4-0 lb. The formation begins its turn away from the target. The flak continues. The fighters return. Then Rosenthal's aircraft takes a hit. A flak burst close enough to rock the plane sideways. Shrapnel punches through the fuselage. Alarms sound. The number 2 engine is trailing smoke. Oil pressure dropping. He feathers the propeller and shuts it down. 3 engines now. The formation is pulling away. Standard procedure. They can't slow down. He increases power on the remaining engines. The B-17 struggles to keep up. Fuel consumption increases. He does the math in his head. Range versus fuel. Speed versus altitude. The numbers are not encouraging. Then the number 4 engine begins to overheat. Cylinder head temperature climbing into the red. The engineer reports possible coolant loss. Rosenthal knows what this means. He has minutes before that engine fails, maybe less. He calls to the crew, prepare to bail out. The standard procedure, the safe procedure. 10 parachutes, 10 chances with German territory below. Some might evade, some might become prisoners. All will survive. But Rosenthal looks at the instruments, looks at the map, looks at the 2 engines still running, and makes a different calculation. The co-pilot repeats the suggestion. Bail out now while we have altitude. The navigator agrees. They're over Germany alone. 2 engines, no fighter cover, no formation. Every German pilot in the sector will see them. Rosenthal tells them no. He's done the math. 2 engines provide enough thrust to maintain flight if he reduces weight and accepts lower altitude. The fuel remaining is sufficient if he plots the most direct course home and doesn't waste a drop on evasive maneuvers. The aircraft is damaged but structurally sound. The controls respond. The hydraulics function. His voice on the intercom is calm. We're going home together. Stay on the guns. Watch for fighters. We'll make it. The crew has flown with him long enough to know his tone. This isn't bravado. This isn't denial. This is a decision based on analysis. They trust his calculations more than they trust German parachute landings. He drops the B-17 out of formation altitude down to 15,000 ft. The lower altitude reduces engine strain and allows the remaining engines to operate more efficiently. It also brings them within range of every light flak gun on the ground. But he's betting on speed over altitude. A moving target versus a predictable one. The crippled bomber limps north alone against the sky. The gunners scan constantly for fighters. The engineer monitors the surviving engines with obsessive attention. The navigator provides heading corrections. The radio operator listens for distress calls from other bombers. Any intelligence about German fighter activity? Rosenthal flies manually, no autopilot. He feels the aircraft through the controls, the vibration, the response, the way it wants to yaw with asymmetric thrust. He compensates instinctively, his hands and feet making constant tiny adjustments. The formation is far ahead now, probably crossing back into Holland, probably beginning descent toward England. His crew won't see Thorpe Abbots at the same time as the others, if they see it at all. West of Munich, a pair of Bf-109 spot them. Lone bomber, low altitude, wounded, easy kill. They come in from the rear quarter. The tail gunner opens fire first, then the waist gunners. Tracers arc across the sky. Rosenthal doesn't maneuver aggressively. He can't. The aircraft is too fragile. Instead, he makes small controlled movements, enough to disrupt the fighter's aim, enough to give his gunners better angles. The 109s make one pass, then another, then break off. Perhaps low on ammunition, perhaps surprised by the defensive fire from a supposedly crippled plane. Over France, the weather begins to deteriorate. Cloud layers thicken, visibility drops. This is both blessing and curse. Clouds hide them from fighters. Clouds also hide the ground. Navigation becomes estimation. Dead reckoning. The fuel gauges continue their steady decline. Rosenthal recalculates constantly. Fuel flow versus distance, wind correction versus time. He adjusts the mixture settings to lean out the engines, saving every gallon, stretching the range. His co-pilot suggests landing in France. Find an emergency field. The navigator mentions Switzerland, neutral territory. Internment is better than death. Rosenthal acknowledges these options, then continues toward England. The channel appears ahead, grey water under grey sky, the white cliffs of Dover somewhere in the murk. Rosenthal begins a shallow descent, saving fuel, preparing for the final leg. The English coast materializes. The crew releases collective breath, but they're not safe. The fuel situation is critical. The nearest airfield is minutes away, maybe. The engines have been running at maximum continuous power for hours. Temperatures are high, oil pressure is marginal. Rosenthal radios ahead, emergency landing. 2 engines out, fuel critical, priority approach. The tower acknowledges, clears the pattern. Emergency crews stand by, but Thorpe Abbotts is still 20 m away, and the number 3 engine begins to sputter. The fuel gauge for the number 3 engine reads empty. The tank is dry. The engine coughs once, twice, then dies. The propeller windmills uselessly. Rosenthal feathers it immediately. 1 engine now. The number 1 engine, the only thing standing between 10 men in a very hard landing. The B-17 descends whether he wants it to or not. Physics dictates terms. 1 engine cannot maintain altitude with the aircraft's weight. He manages a controlled descent, 200 ft per minute, then 300. The altimeter unwinds. His co-pilot is on the radio giving position updates. The navigator calculates time to base. The engineer watches the last engine like a man watching a dying friend. The gunners are silent. They've done their job. Now it's entirely on the pilots. Rosenthal scans ahead looking for Thorpe Abbotts, looking for the runway, looking for any flat piece of English farmland. If it comes to that, the clouds are low, maybe 800 ft. Below that is ground, trees, buildings, stone walls that will tear an aircraft apart. The airspeed is critical. Too slow and they stall. Too fast and he won't be able to stop on the runway. He balances the equation with throttle and trim, flying the narrow margin between 2 types of death. 5 miles out. Altitude 600 ft descending. The tower calls wind direction and speed. Runway alignment. He'll have a tailwind, not ideal, but there's no fuel to go around and approach from the other direction. 1 chance, 4 miles. The number 1 engine temperature is in the red. The engineer reports possible imminent failure. Rosenthal acknowledges without emotion. He needs 3 more minutes from that engine. Just 3 minutes. 3 mi altitude, 400 ft. He can see the base now, the runway, the pattern is clear. Every other aircraft has been diverted or is holding. The emergency vehicles are positioned along the runway, waiting 2 miles. He lowers the landing gear. The hydraulics groan. The gear doors open. The wheels lock down. Green lights confirm. 1 small mercy. The drag from the gear increases the descent rate. He compensates with a slight increase in throttle. The engine responds barely. 1 mile, altitude 200 ft. He's too low and too slow. The stall warning horn chirps intermittently. The B-7 is flying on the edge of aerodynamic collapse, but he's aligned with the runway. He's going to make it to the field. Whether he makes it onto the runway intact is the remaining question. The fence at the end of the runway passes beneath them. Rosenthal is flying now with instinct built from dozens of landings and hundreds of hours in the aircraft. He can feel the controls going soft, the aircraft settling, the ground rising. He pulls the throttle to idle. The engine spools down. The B-7 drops the last 20 ft onto the runway. Hard the tires scream. The shock absorbers compress violently. Metal groans, but the gear holds. No brakes at first. He lets the aircraft slow naturally, then applies brakes gently. Too much, and the tires blow. The runway ahead is long enough. He has room. The bomber decelerates, 50 mph. 40-30, he steers off the active runway onto the taxiway. The emergency vehicles follow. He continues to a hard stand away from other aircraft just in case fire starts. Just in case something finally breaks. He sets the parking brake, shuts down the last engine. The sudden silence is profound. For hours there's been engine roar, wind noise, radio chatter, gunfire. Now there's quiet. His co-pilot looks at him. The crew begins to move, hatches open. Men climb out onto the wing, stand on solid ground. They don't cheer, they don't celebrate. They're too exhausted, too aware of how close the margins were. Rosenthal completes the shutdown checklist, muscle memory procedure. Then he climbs out. The ground crew is already inspecting the damage, counting holes, assessing repairs. The B-17 looks like it flew through a metal shredder. Over 200 shrapnel holes, 2 engines destroyed, fuel tanks nearly empty, hydraulic fluid leaking. The crew chief walks around the aircraft slowly. He's seen damaged bombers before. He's seen aircraft written off as total losses. He stops near Rosenthal, shakes his head, asks how they made it back. Rosenthal doesn't answer immediately. He's looking at the bomber, the machine that held together, the engineering that proved sufficient, the math that worked. He tells the crew chief they flew it carefully. The mission debrief happens 2 hours later. Intelligence officers want details, target assessment, fighter encounters, flak concentrations. Rosenthal provides the information methodically, but the questions eventually turn to the flight home. The decision not to bail out the single-engine landing. The operations officer is skeptical. Bringing a crippled bomber back alone is not standard procedure. It's not recommended. It's barely possible. He suggests Rosenthal got lucky. Rosenthal doesn't argue. He presents the calculations, fuel consumption at reduced altitude, thrust requirements for 2 engines than 1, weight reduction from expended ammunition and bombs. Distance versus endurance. The math is sound. Other pilots in the debrief room listen carefully. They're thinking about their own crews, their own possible situations. The doctrine says bail out, but Rosenthal just demonstrated an alternative, a possibility. The group commander ends the debrief without explicit approval or disapproval of Rosenthal's decision. But the story spreads through the squadron, through the group, through other bases, the pilot who brought them all home on 1 engine. What the group doesn't know yet is that this is not an isolated incident. This is a pattern beginning to form. Over the next 3 months, Rosenthal flies 17 more missions. Bremen, Berlin, Augsburg, targets deep in Germany. Each mission carries the same risks: flak, fighters, weather, mechanical failure, and repeatedly his aircraft takes severe damage. An engine lost over Brunswick, hydraulic failure over Kassel, flak damage so extensive over Frankfurt that the group commander assumes the plane lost. Each time Rosenthal brings the crew home, he refuses to abandon aircraft that other pilots would consider unflyable. He becomes known for improvisation, for understanding the B-17's margins better than the engineers who designed it. On a mission to Posen, his bomber loses 2 engines and half the rudder. The conventional response is bailout over friendly territory. Rosenthal calculates a different solution. He trims the aircraft to compensate for the missing rudder surface. Uses asymmetric thrust from the remaining engines to maintain directional control. Flies 300 and back to England at 4000 FT. The crew never questions his decisions. Now they've learned that his calculations work, that his understanding of the aircraft is comprehensive, that his priority is always bringing everyone home. Other crews begin requesting transfer to his command. Pilots want to learn his methods. Gunners want the survival rate his crew demonstrates. By May of 1944, Rosenthal has completed his first tour of 25 missions. The standard rotation is back to the States. Training duty, a break from combat, he volunteers to stay. Another tour, another 25 missions. The odds of surviving 50 missions are statistically negligible. He understands the math. He stays anyway. The Air Force begins studying his techniques. Operations officers interview his crew. Engineers examine the damage patterns on his aircraft. They're trying to quantify what he does that others don't. Part of it is technical knowledge. He knows engine performance curves from memory. He understands structural load limits. He studied aerodynamics beyond what flight school teaches. Part of it is decision, making under pressure. He doesn't panic. He doesn't freeze. He processes information rapidly and acts on logic rather than fear. But part of it is something harder to quantify, a belief that the machine will hold together if you understand it completely, that the math works even in extremis, that bringing everyone home is possible if you refuse to accept alternatives. By August 1944, Rosenthal has flown more than 50 missions. He's become a squadron commander. His methods are now semi-officially recognized. Pilots receive informal briefings on his techniques. Stay with the aircraft longer. Understand your margins. Calculate rather than react. the survival statistics for his squadron improve measurably. Fewer bailouts, more successful emergency landings, more crews returning intact. The Air Force doesn't change official doctrine, but in practice on the line the culture shifts. The doctrine acknowledges what Rosenthal demonstrated, that sometimes the right choice is not in the manual. That crew survival can depend on one person understanding the machine beyond standard procedures. That courage combined with logic changes outcomes. Other bomber groups begin adopting similar approaches. Pilots push damaged aircraft further before abandoning them. Engineers provide better training on emergency procedures. The institutional knowledge expands. The impact is measurable. 8th Air Force casualty rates decline slightly in late 1944. Not dramatically. The war is still lethal, but at the margins more men survive, more crews come home. The statistical curve bends slightly towards survival. Rosenthal himself never speaks of heroism. When asked about his decisions, he discusses mathematics, fuel calculations, engine performance, weight, and balance. He frames everything in technical terms. The emotional component remains unspoken, but his crew understands. They know the difference between a pilot who follows procedure and one who knows when to break it. They know that every landing at Thorpe Abbotts with the full crew aboard represents a choice, a calculation, a refusal to accept the standard answer. By war's end, Rosenthal has flown more than 50 combat missions. He's been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. His aircraft has returned from missions that should have ended in bailouts or crashes. His crew has survived against odds that claimed thousands of others. The 7 bridges referenced in the title refer to a specific mission sequence in April 1944, a series of raids on transportation infrastructure across Germany. Rosenthal's bomber group targeted 7 bridge complexes over 10 days. Each mission faced intense opposition. Each mission resulted in severe damage to his aircraft. Each mission ended with the full crew returning to base. The unofficial count by his ground crew totals over 900 flak and bullet holes across those missions. The B-17 he flew most frequently spent more time in repair than in service, but it always flew again. Patched, repaired, ready, Robert Rosenthal survives the war. He returns to the States in late 1945. Law school, a career built on the same logic and precision that kept him alive at 24-0. Aero 0 FT. He practices law for decades, raises a family, lives a quiet civilian life. He rarely speaks about the war. When asked, he deflects. The real heroes didn't come home. The men who deserve recognition are in the military cemeteries across Europe. He was simply doing his job, but at reunions of the 100th Bomb Group, the surviving crews seek him out. They remember the missions where he refused to give up, the landings that seemed impossible, the quiet competence that made survival feel achievable even when logic suggested otherwise. In interviews conducted decades later, his former crew members describe him with consistent language. Unflappable, brilliant, stubborn. The pilot who understood that bringing everyone home was not just preferable, it was possible, and possibility once demonstrated becomes precedent. The B-17 itself becomes legendary. Over 38,000 produced during the war, millions of flight hours logged, thousands lost, but the stories that persist are not about the aircraft. They're about the men who flew them, the decisions made at altitude, the calculations performed under fire, the refusal to accept impossible odds. Rosenthal's contribution to aviation is not a specific invention, not a technical innovation. It's a demonstrated principle that understanding your machine completely expands what's possible, that doctrine has limits, that sometimes survival depends on knowing when to break the rules. Modern aviation training includes scenario-based decision-making descended from lessons learned in bombers over Germany. Commercial pilots train for engineer-out procedures using principles Rosenthal applied empirically. Military aviation doctrine acknowledges the gap between textbook procedure and field reality. The bomber offensive over Europe cost the 8th Air Force over 26,000 dead, more than the entire Marine Corps in the Pacific. The casualty rate among bomber crews exceeded that of almost any other military specialty. The young men who flew these missions understood the odds, they flew anyway. Rosenthal's story stands out not because he was uniquely brave. Thousands of bomber crews demonstrated equal courage. He stands out because he proved that intelligence applied to courage improves survival, that calculation in the face of fear is not cold, it's practical. It's human. When he died in 2007, his obituary in the New York Times mentioned his Distinguished Service Cross, his 52 combat missions, his legal career. What it couldn't fully capture was the number of men who lived because he refused to accept standard procedures as absolute. At his funeral, survivors from his crew attended, old men now, remembering when they were young and scared and trusting a 24-year-old pilot to make decisions with their lives. They spoke quietly among themselves about missions that should have ended differently, about the calculations that kept them alive. One crew member, interviewed years earlier, tried to explain what made Rosenthal different. He said it wasn't fearlessness. He said Rosenthal was afraid like everyone else, but the fear didn't override the logic. The fear existed alongside the calculation, and when the calculation said something was possible, he believed the math more than the fear. That's the legacy, not recklessness disguised as courage, not luck misidentified as skill, but the disciplined application of knowledge under pressure, the refusal to surrender to circumstances when alternatives exist, the quiet demonstration that competence and courage together change outcomes. The B-17s are mostly gone now. Museums hold a few dozen survivors, carefully restored, polished, very different from the battered aircraft that returned to Thorpe Abbotts with engines smoking and hydraulics failing. But the principle remains: understand your machine, respect the margins, but know them precisely. When the manual says it's over, verify that conclusion. Calculate, consider, act. Rosenthal brought 10 men home repeatedly when doctrine said it couldn't be done. He demonstrated that the line between possible and impossible is often thinner than official procedure acknowledges, that sometimes the best choice is the one that appears in no manual. 7 bridges, 52 missions, 10 crew members brought home every time. The numbers are precise because the man who flew those missions thought in numbers, fuel and weight and thrust and time, variables in an equation where the solution was always survival. They mocked the idea that a crippled bomber could fly home alone. They called it wishful thinking. They pointed to doctrine and statistics and common sense. And then he did it not once, but repeatedly, until it wasn't remarkable anymore, until it became something other pilots tried, until the possible expanded to include what had been dismissed as impossible. That's how wars are won at the margins, not through grand strategy alone, but through individual moments when one person calculates differently, acts on that calculation, survives, and in surviving demonstrates a truth that changes what others attempt. Robert Rosenthal never claimed to be exceptional. He insisted he was simply careful, methodical, willing to do the math when others relied on instinct. Perhaps that's the real lesson, that heroism often looks like precision. That courage can be quiet, that the most important victories are measured in people brought home rather than targets destroyed. The sky above England is peaceful now. No formations of heavy bombers climbing through morning clouds. No flak bursts at altitude. No young men calculating fuel versus distance while engines fail. But the principle persists in every cockpit where a pilot faces impossible circumstances and reaches for calculation instead of panic. In every moment when training and intelligence combine to create solutions, in every crew that makes it home because someone refused to accept the official answer, Rosenthal proved that knowing your machine better than anyone else gives you options others don't see. That logic under fire is not cold. It's the warmest thing.